Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
My Family Recipe is a new podcast from Food 52 and Heritage Radio Network, bringing you cherished heirloom recipes and the stories behind them. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. It's Tuesday, November 16th, 2021, and I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host here on Beer Sessions Radio. All right, we've got a great group of guests. We're going to talk about Doomsday drinking and Japanese record bars with a great cast of characters. Let's go around the room and introduce each other. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Maestro, the founder and owner of Beer Wax Brooklyn and now also Beer Wax Queens. Opening up soon.
Ooh, almost soon, right?
Yes, hopefully. Ridgewood, Queens, correct.
Great, and we're going to talk about your Indiegogo campaign too today.
Excellent.
All right, and Aaron?
Hi, I'm Aaron Goldfarb. I'm a journalist and an author of several books, including Hacking Whiskey.
Well, Aaron, it's great to have you on, man. We haven't talked in a couple of years, so looking forward to talking today. And Thomas?
Yeah, hey, I'm Thomas Galkin. I'm the multimedia editor at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and I'm here to talk about the Doomsday Drinking Guide that I wrote.
All right, so Thomas, that was one of the more interesting emails I got recently. There's the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and they wanted to talk about beer. So I loved it. Just tell us about what you do there and what the Doomsday Guide to Drinking is.
Yeah, so it's basically the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists goes back to the end of the Second World War. It was founded by Manhattan Project scientists, the scientists who helped develop the nuclear bomb. And they were concerned that, after this was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the public needed to understand all the dangers about it. And so a group of scientists created the Bulletin in 1945. And then after a couple of years, it was clear this was a successful operation, reaching out to the public and to policymakers and other scientists. And so they wanted to sort of amp it up as a magazine. And so they made their first cover. And the first actual cover of the magazine in 1947, in the summer of 1947, was this Doomsday clock, which the wife of one of the scientists, Martil, who was an artist and quite well known in her own right, put together for the cover. And she just decided this clock idea would work and picked 7 minutes to midnight as what was pleasing to her eye. So that's where it started, just kind of somewhat arbitrarily. But then ever since then, it became this really iconic symbol for, the state of nuclear affairs in the Cold War. And so over the years, it's gone back and forth. We come up to, the end of the Cold War. It went all the way down to 17 minutes before midnight. And then now we've added in other things like climate change and disruptive technology to the nuclear threats as things we cover. And the Doomsday Clock covers. So now we're at 100 seconds, which is pretty close. It's actually the closest it's ever been. How does that get to drinking? I basically...
Wait, before you get to that. So how often does it get recalibrated? It's not a clock that's ticking like there's one in Union Square that's counting off the debt or something.
Right. It doesn't just count down by itself. Boris Johnson actually just a couple weeks ago at the COP26 Glasgow conference on climate change talked about it like it was this James Bond bomb that he was, was at 1 minute to midnight, which isn't right. But it's a metaphor for how dire the threat of all these different issues is to humanity. So again, on nuclear weapons, climate change, and disruptive technologies, which is a whole kind of basket of things that we can talk about. But it gets set every year by the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin, which is a group of scientists and policy experts from all those different areas: nuclear weapons, climate, and cybersecurity, biosecurity, especially now, is important with the pandemic. And they're all top experts in their fields, and they come together and bring their scientific background and know-how and policy background to considering these issues. The clock itself isn't necessarily a scientific instrument, but it's reflecting the understanding that these experts have about, where we are and how worried we need to be, and what the direction we're going in is. So right now it's not been great the last few years.
So it keeps the pulse of what's going on in the world. That's pretty cool. So then the Doomsday drinking guide, that's the fun one. I mean, is that like how many beers I can drink before Doomsday? I mean,
yeah. I mean, right now it wouldn't be that many, I guess, 100 seconds. But basically, I was sort of interested in, the pop culture around the Doomsday Clock, which has a long history of its own, from back when it first appeared, all the way up through Watchmen, the comic series, and the TV show. Has this Doomsday Clock that's really central to it. So it's been a feature in all kinds of ways in pop culture, and we've got a virtual tour on the website actually that goes into that you can check out at the Bulletin site. But the drinking element of it to me was interesting in the background while I was working on some of these really serious topics. And then one day this spring, I saw this big full-page ad in the New York Times from New Belgium brewers for this beer they called Torched Earth, which is or was a limited release of a beer made entirely of ingredients that would be available after the climate apocalypse, essentially.
But wait, was this a real beer, or this is just like a messaging ad?
This is a real beer. So the idea was part of a campaign that they were doing to raise awareness about climate change and sustainability. But they actually brewed it. It wasn't widely available. It was in Asheville, I think, one of their breweries, and maybe Colorado. So I never got to try it because I'm here based in Chicago, where the Bulletin is. But the idea was to kind of create something not good, basically, because that's what we'll be left with. So the sort of slogan for the beer was, we brewed the beer of the future, and it tastes awful. And so
like a climate. It says there a climate ravaged future. So what would be tainted?
So in their beer specifically, they used smoke tainted water, grains that were like really hardy but not as flavorful because they had to resist drought, extracts that were shelf stable, so probably full of kind of preservatives and things like that, and then dandelion weeds. And they put that all together and made what they called a dark and starchy beer that tasted bad.
For sure. Aaron, have you ever heard of that beer?
Yeah. It got a lot of pretty easy viral press when it came out. Yeah, very interesting.
Aaron, just for you and all your writing, I mean, you've written a lot about beer and whiskey. Are there other beers coming out or drinks that are talking about climate change or things like that?
Well, I mean, I think inherently a lot of makers of alcohol consider themselves, farmers and people highly concerned with the environment and, a green earth and whatnot. So many of them are trying to, improve how they produce alcohol as much as possible. They're not necessarily saying this is a doomsday beer or a doomsday gin or whatever, but the mere fact they're, having as little waste as possible in producing their stuff is saying that, we are coming to a doomsday if we don't do a better job of doing everything, including producing alcohol.
Yeah. And Chris, for you at Beerwax, is there more awareness from the consumers about like carbon neutral or other like eco-friendly things in a drink?
I believe so. I mean, one thing that allows us to stand out as a bar is that we actually are solar powered. Just on that note, we have, I would say about 70% of our power is generated from solar panels on our roofs. And some of our customers know that and understand that. So I think they gravitate towards that. But, it does come up in the conversation, obviously, because we're at such a dire place with climate change, with the state of the world. But so, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So Thomas, if this is what you write about all the time, I mean, you're covering different aspects of, you said, what is it? It says array of disruptive technologies.
Yeah, that's part of it. So like I was saying earlier, we've got the nuclear beat basically, and then a climate change beat, and then the disruptive technologies. And we have editors who are dedicated to each of those areas. I'm the multimedia editor, so I'm sort of here to kind of cover all of those things in some more creative ways than just the in-depth articles that we publish on a regular basis. So I bring in some humor for one thing, but also I try and do things with different multimedia elements, and we've got all kinds of graphic essays and photo essays and videos and things like that we've done. Wow. So
it's heavy.
That's my role. Real. But yeah, it's all doomsday. It's all heavy on sort of the things that are man-made threats. That's pretty important because it's not just any threat to civilization. It's the ones that we have direct control over.
Oh, well then back in your intro, it says beer and nukes go back to the nuclear. Beer and nukes go back to the early days of the atomic age. How does that tie together?
Yeah, so, well, for one thing, the very first chain reaction, which was here in Chicago, the nuclear chain reaction with Enrico Fermi's group, was the origin of the both nuclear energy as an option and the development of the nuclear bomb. And they celebrated kind of famously with this bottle of Chianti that they all signed, all the scientists signed. So there's pictures of that you can find online of this famous Enrico Fermi bottle of wine. But beyond that, one of the more interesting things I brought up in the story was the fact that in the 50s, when nuclear testing was really happening a lot, the United States was conducting dozens and dozens and dozens of nuclear tests. One of them was part of this Operation Teapot series of bomb tests, and it was focused on seeing how a nuclear blast would affect kind of like civilian infrastructure. So houses, they built a little town, and they put mannequins up, and then you may have even seen the footage of this. It's kind of made its way into pop culture too, buildings getting sort of blown away. And in that test, they set up shelves of different food products, including drinks, including beer. So there was several different kinds of beer bottles that they with beer in them, that they set up to basically try and blow away with a nuclear blast. And this was a Operation Q, which was about twice the size of the nuclear bomb over Hiroshima. And so they wanted to see, what would happen to the bottles, what would happen to the contents. And they didn't actually, some of the bottles didn't break at all, which was remarkable. But the radiation effects were fairly minimal. But the most interesting thing about this, and by the way, I'd point to historian Alex Wellerstein, who's the guy who kind of pulled this out several years ago from the archives and put it on his site. But the report describes them as having immediate taste tests. So somebody went out there and drank this beer right after it was attempted to be incinerated by a nuclear blast. So they watched the mushroom cloud and then went out to have a drink, which is kind of nuts.
And what was the survival rate of those people?
That I don't know. I think they stayed in on them.
There's always missing.
Service to the country, though.
Yes, such a different time. And jumping ahead, like you think about, the good times. I'm going to switch it for a minute before I ask you about radiation. All the good stuff that I've been dying to ask you. I want to go to Aaron, some of the things he's written about, because we're going to segue to Chris's bar. You've written so many really great articles. One year we talked about, what's the Black Forest beer from Germany that everybody loves?
Rathaus.
The Rathaus Pills. I think you wrote an article about that, because we'd go to Roberta's where our studio was, and every beer guy wanted the Rathaus Pills. And you've really kept the pulse. For me, you're always like, and right now I know you as Vine parents and mothers, you always keep the pulse of what's going on in the drinking world. And I was just reading an article you wrote about the Horse Inn in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you were talking about best bars in the country, but it says the Horse Inn reminds you why we like to go out in the first place. I could talk about that for a minute, because sense of place, I think that's really important. I know you were referencing kind of post, COVID restrictions.
Yeah, well, VinePair just actually had an awards thing for everything from spirits producers, wine shops, to breweries, to bars, and I believe they were named Bar of the Year Horse Inn. I didn't just outright pick that; they picked it, and I wrote it. But I have been to the Horse Inn, and I love the Horse Inn. And you're right; it is a perfectly fine bar to take away some cocktails from. But it's a truly great bar when you get to go in there and hang out and eat dinner and drink some beers, and then maybe, go on to some whiskey, and then maybe play a game of foosball, and then maybe have a cocktail. And, that's what truly, it reminds you what the purpose of bars are. They're not simply to make drinks and serve drinks.
Yeah, no, the quote, it says, it reminds you why you like to go out in the first place. And then you said, our vision, this is quoting the owner, you said, our vision was to make going out special again. We wanted it to be a 3-hour event. We wanted people to come inside and forget about the troubles of the day and relax and let us show them a great time. Did you actually spend time there?
Yeah. I've been, going to Lancaster since before the pandemic. It's, one of those somehow somewhat undiscovered gems near New York City. Everyone goes to Long Island and the Hudson Valley and places like that. But, Lancaster's pretty close to New York. It's very close to Baltimore and Philadelphia. And for whatever reason, it hasn't fully, exploded in the kinds of publications and amongst the kind of people that, I write about and for whatever reason. Maybe it's because it's in Pennsylvania. Maybe it's because it's in Amish country. I don't know. But it's a real gem of a city, and there's quite a few great restaurants and bars. But Horse Inn is at the top of things. I think the first time I went there was probably 2018 or 2019. It's a bar that's been around since Prohibition, but under its current owner, Matt Russell, who trained as a chef under Sean Brock in Charleston. It's really, taken a leap forward, both food wise and beverage program wise.
Yeah. When I think about Doomsday, my first thought was like, there's a lot of beer quizzes and education programs where they ask you, what's your desert island beer? And I feel like when you wrote about Horse Inn, my first thought was, Aaron, what's your like last meal? It's kind of the same thing. What would they say? Doomsday clock's ticking down to 1 second. What's your last meal and your last drink? How about that?
Right. I don't know what my last meal is, man. I've said for the longest time, I went to college in Syracuse, and there's a barbecue place up there called Dinosaur. We actually have a location in Brooklyn too, and they just make some incredible wings. I don't know if I'd waste a last meal on some $10 wings, but damn, they're good. My last drink, whew, that's a tough one. I'd probably go with if I could get some birth year whiskey, some 1979 Wild Turkey.
Oh man, something to think about. And now to Chris. So let's tell us about Beer Wax, and I want to hear about what's a Japanese record bar, because you've got a cool place, and talking about sense of place and a place I want to go, and maybe the place I want to be on as the Doomsday clock ticks.
Right.
Tell me about Beer Wax, but tell me about these Japanese record bars.
Yes, I mean, they essentially served as inspiration for Beer Wax. They're sometimes known as jazz kisas, hi-fi bars, record listening bars, but essentially the idea, originated in Japan around the 60s. At the time, it was a little bit pricey and also rare for a jazz musician from the States to come and tour in Japan. And there was such an explosion in interest amongst young Japanese folks in American jazz. So the next best thing you can do is go to a place that plays jazz on vinyl, especially with some audiophile speakers, so it almost sounds like you're there in the recording. So these things in the 60s started sprouting up. And mind you, records were super expensive at the time in Japan. So a lot of folks didn't have their own large record collections. But I guess the folks that had the money for large record collections also had the money to open up a bar. So a lot of these folks opened up bars, brought all their records to the bar, and just spun records, typically jazz. And folks would come, and sometimes there was a rule where you could not speak. It was like a no talking jazz kisa. So you just go there. The owner usually it's the owner that was there playing the records and serving typically a kisa is actually literally a place where you sip tea, but it expanded to include alcoholic beverages as well. So you would go there, listen to a side of her jazz record, and just marvel at the musicianship. Excuse me, I'm one beer in, and it was just a way for folks to get away and really delve into this art form. And of course, Japanese, whether it's hip hop, whether it's jazz, have a very sincere adoration for American pop culture and music. And to be quite honest, I didn't realize what I was conceiving in my head when I thought of the idea of Beer Wax was this idea of a jazz kisa. It wasn't until I explained the idea to someone that they're like, oh, what you're trying to build actually exists in Japan already. And they actually showed me some pictures of a place called Jazz, Blues, and Soul, or JBS in Shibuya. And I looked at the picture and I said, wow, this is exactly what I've been dreaming about of building in New York.
And did you ever go there?
I did. So I've never been to Japan up to that point. But when we celebrated 1 year of being open in Brooklyn, my wife and I decided to go to Tokyo and to pay homage to these places that served as inspiration for us. So we visited JBS. We visited a place called Swing that was the size probably of like one person's living room in Brooklyn. But this guy had about 2,000 records in the space and beautiful, large, old school speakers, and just one person working there. And he was the owner and was just playing some incredible music for us. And literally there were 2 other people there. And I don't even know how they stay open, but these places have been open, some of them for 20 years plus. And it was just incredible to see this idea that I had as something that just existed and is thriving in Japan and continues to thrive in Japan.
Well, Chris, we're going to talk more about it in your new project, but back to what I asked Aaron, it's the Doomsday clock is ticking. What are you going to drink, and then what are you going to play? What record are you going to pull and play for us? But what are you drinking too? You can tell me what you're drinking now if you want.
What am I literally drinking right this second?
Yeah, why not?
I pulled the new Black Ops 4 Roses barrel-aged stout off the shelf for whatever reason. It's not the greatest 5 p.m. beer, but I got a lot of beer in my house, so I don't need to necessarily finish it. The record I would probably play, and it's probably kind of trite, but it's been the album I've loved my entire life, is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, that's cool. Well, Thomas, you got us inspired a little bit. When you're writing this, the guide, is this the first time you wrote the Doomsday drinking guide?
Yeah. This is the first drinking guide that I'm aware of. I mean, we've got, it was our 75th anniversary last year, so we have a big archive. So I haven't checked carefully, but I think we haven't done it before. So this is the first drinking guide. We've probably done other guides before, but
yeah. How did you pick the drinks? I mean, I saw there was some things with the name Atomic, but why don't you walk us through what some of the drinks are? And it's very lighthearted, I will say.
Yeah, I mean, that was the goal, I mean, some of these topics can really be a downer, so I try to put a different spin on it sometimes, so you can kind of learn something about these issues at the same time as not getting overwhelmed by them. But so I started with that full page ad from New Belgium and kind of started going beyond that. Just searching at first for things that had to do with, that had like beers that were named after atomic something or nuclear this or that. And there are a lot of those, right? I mean, there's something about beer for some reason that appeals to this idea of, permanent death, I guess. But you get a lot of cans with art that, is apocalyptic and names that have to do with atomic this and that. But the more I looked into it, the more I saw that, there were actually a few breweries that really took the idea a little further and kind of, developed a whole kind of persona around the idea, either of climate or atomic weapons or anything else like that. So the main one that connects to the bulletin right off the bat is the Manhattan Project Beer Company, which is a Dallas-based brewery. And they make a ton of beers all named in some way to do with nuclear weapons. And after scientists, including Oppenheimer, and you can probably guess what the punny name they came up with for Oppenheimer, which is an IPA. So Hoppenheimer. They've got, they also did a beer called Bikini Atoll, which was problematic and got some press because that's a pretty sensitive subject for the inhabitants of the islands that the U.S. Used to do these nuclear tests back then, and who were displaced and who were still suffering from, the effects of the radiation in that area. So calling a beer after that, is kind of questionable. But then there's just other beer companies that are named after more specific nuclear testing, nuclear test series, like Abel Baker Brewing Company, which is out of Vegas. And all of these companies have like pretty funny marketing material. I mean, they talk about how they're influenced by nuclear weapons, right? To make their beer, or at least promote it. So it can be pretty funny, if kind of disturbing at the same time. But the like Abel Baker, for instance, talks about their beer being, dangerously potent, and you'll detect a double flash of flavor as you savor notes of fig and light black pepper. So there's lots of things like that. And then that just took me in new directions too, because I went beyond beer. There's a really good example of a non-beer atomic related drink, which is a group of researchers went to Chernobyl and decided to distill some vodka out of water, or out of rather with the grains, a rye that was sort of grown in this contaminated zone, to prove that you could produce safe drinks or safe agricultural products in the area around Chernobyl, and that's been an interesting process. They've also ended up making an apple-based drink that they're actually trying to sell now in the UK and in Ukraine. So that's an ongoing effort there. So that kept going, and there's other examples I can give you.
It might be trendy now with COVID. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it's radiated." Radiated for purity? I don't know, man.
Right. I mean, and people don't realize that's actually that is a use of radiation. I mean, food and food products are irradiated a lot. There's gamma rays that are used to help sanitize all kinds of food products. So, the nuclear science is real when it comes to things you put in your body.
Yeah. Hey, we're just getting started. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio. All right.
Good food is worth 1,000 words. This is Aarti Menon, and I'm delighted to share a new podcast with you, My Family Recipe, from Food 52 and Heritage Radio Network. Adapted from Food 52's much-loved column of the same name, the My Family Recipe podcast will bring its pages to life. Each episode of My Family Recipe brings you a cherished heirloom recipe and the story behind it, from voices across the world of food.
We'd open these tubs of dough and they would exhaust these incredible yeasty fumes, and it just smelled like nothing else. It was so intoxicating.
I'll interview writers and chefs, parents and children, about what's passed down along with the foods that we know and love.
Chinese people aren't born with a download on how to velvet chicken. That's not something that just comes to you.
Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. Let's come out and support Heritage Radio Network on Giving Tuesday, November 30th. Check us out and support at heritageradionetwork.org. All right. So we're talking about Doomsday Drinking Guide and Japanese record bars. Thomas Culkin of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. It's above my educational level, but we're having a lot of fun. So Thomas, you said that radiation, there was one thing you mentioned about, you said that were there studies done about ways to combat, say you're exposed to radiation, like drinking diuretics. Is drinking beer good for you if you've been exposed to an atomic bomb or something?
So, yeah, the Department of Energy actually has guidelines for dealing with exposure to radioactive products of nuclear events. And they do recommend basically fluid intake as a way to help deal with the, whether it's hydrogen or other isotopes that would be in your body. And if you drink enough fluid, you can help sort of dilute that effect. So they recommend things like coffee, tea, but also beer and wine. So that's official government guidance. Take it as you will. Hopefully nobody has to test that.
So Aaron, you write a lot about whiskeys too. Has this ever come up? Any talk about radiated products, or is purity? How do you even define purity? I don't know what kind of language you're getting in your pitches about whiskeys.
Well, I get a lot of nonsense in my pitches about whiskey, but I think distilling inherently strips, the product beforehand of just about everything and turns it into to pure alcohol. So that's why there's no reason to be scared of drinking radiated whatever from Chernobyl. Yeah, I get these kind of pitches. I'm of the belief that whiskey is good for you. So I don't know if it'll stave off radiation, but I'll keep trying.
Yeah. And then what about, you mentioned that in the new Belgian beer, we had to resort to using dandelions because I guess dandelions were the only thing that would grow. But my grandfather used to gather dandelions and make salads. And in colonial times, that was a common ingredient for homebrew, dandelions in place as a bittering. And does anybody want to talk about how those other ingredients could be used? I don't know.
Well, actually, one of my least favorite beers of all time that wasn't intentionally meant to be a Doomsday beer was made with dandelions. It's Fantôme, one of my favorite breweries out of Belgium. They make saisons and farmhouse ales. They have a dandelion one that just every single time I try it does not do it for me. It's called Piss and Lit.
It's nasty. I know a guy up in what the hell's his name? Raphael Lyons Enlightenment Wines. He owns Honey Bar, and he makes different types of meads. He makes a really good dandelion wine, which is basically super bitter, and you're probably going to use it as like a couple drops of it in a cocktail. So the essence of it, can be super bitter. Hey, Chris, let's tell us about your project. So you reached out to me the other day, and it was fortuitous because I just kept thinking, wow, man, if we're talking Doomsday, then I want to be in beer wax and listen to records all night. But you're opening another place. So tell us about the campaign and what you're trying to do there and what it's like opening a second bar. Because that's very hopeful. I'm into positive new things.
Well, let me start with the last question. It's exciting and terrifying at the same time to open up a second location in New York City. As I was mentioned before the actual recording to Aaron, that a year ago, I never would have assumed that we would open up a second location. Things were looking pretty dire. I would say, midway through the first half of the pandemic, around July of 2020, we thought that we would potentially have to close Beer Wax Brooklyn because things were looking so bad. But things turned around. Open Streets has been a blessing for us in Brooklyn on Vanderbilt Avenue. So the opportunity presented itself to open up a second location. I was born and raised in Queens, so it just seemed like the best location for us, just right across the way. Of course, Ridgewood is kind of like right next to Brooklyn, so not the most Queens of Queens neighborhoods, but it's a wonderful location. I lived in Ridgewood several times years ago. My twin daughters were actually raised in Ridgewood, so it feels like homecoming in many ways.
Is it the L train off the L train?
It is. It's the Myrtle Wyckoff stop on the L train. So it's again right on the line of Bushwick. My wife's from Bushwick, which you've met, Jimmy. So she was walking distance from the location, which is in the old theater building on Cypress and Myrtle. And there used to be an old movie theater there that she used to go to when she was a kid. So it feels really nice that one of the owners actually frequented the movie theater in that same building. So we, for the first go around for Beer Wax Brooklyn to raise money, we did an Indiegogo. I'm from a humble background. I was a New York City public school teacher and in education before starting the bar. Parents were both immigrants. So this is, the Indiegogo campaign the first time around was very successful. So we knew that we wanted to do the same thing for Queens. It's a lot bigger of a space than Brooklyn. So we pretty much exhausted our build-out budget. We exhausted our total budget on just the build-out. So now we're looking at a beautiful empty space without furniture and without a sound system in a jazz record bar. So, we are doing the Indiegogo campaign at the moment. We're halfway through. We're halfway to our goal, which is really amazing. But what I want to impress is that a lot of folks, I feel like, oh, this guy has an established bar, he's successful, but what it takes to open up a bar in New York City, it's like moving mountains. So any little bit, whether it's literally $5 or even just sharing the campaign to your friends and folks, is really important for us at this juncture.
So how can we find the Indiegogo?
Yep, it's really simple. You can go to our website, Beerwax Queens, and beer, it's BIERWAX Queens.com, or you can just follow us on Instagram, and that's Beerwax Queens. It's a link in our bio. There are links right there on our website. Or if you go to Indiegogo.com, just search for Beerwax Queens.
Yeah. That's exciting. So do you have to buy records or you have the records?
That's been the question. I've had a lot of records at home that I've been hoarding. And, once you're a record collector, it's an obsession that doesn't stop. So my wife is very happy to get a good 1,000 records out of the house. And then I've been collecting. We have a storage space that the excess has been going to. So we're bringing, I think, about 3,000 records for now into the new space.
Wow, man. Well, good luck. And I'm glad you got to come on and talk about this.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thomas, I don't think you realize how much you stimulated this conversation, because it's sometimes when we book these shows, we're waiting for the hook, and Chris Maestro and Beerwax opening in Queens is kind of the story we wanted to talk about today, because when we started this show, Beer Sessions Radio, in 2010, it was actually we had created a group called Good Beer Seal. It was all indie beer bars, and Chris's Beerwax became one of them. But initially, it was a way to spotlight all the indie good beer bar owners and their establishments. So we some of you may not realize that, but we wanted to bring it back to that.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Oh, no. You're welcome, man. I really am proud of you. But Thomas, this is a fun gig. So what are the biggest challenges that our humanity's facing since we can actually talk to you fairly intelligently?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, before I get into that, I just want to say to Chris, I should mention that along with our drinking guide, we actually have a Doomsday Clock playlist,
that's awesome.
which is all songs that are about the Doomsday Clock or somehow connect to it.
Super cool.
Most famously, probably there's the Iron Maiden song most people know, 2 Minutes to Midnight.
That's right.
So that's on Spotify. And our site. So check it out.
Perfect.
Doomsday Clock. Yeah. So just in terms of these big threats that we cover at the Bulletin, I was talking about climate change with the New Belgium beer and the other examples of that I talk about in the piece. But it's a serious concern for the future of production in general, because barley is a sensitive crop to temperature change and heat, and similarly, hops, like places like the Czech Republic, where you have a Pilsner that really relies on that, is going to have a completely different profile as that gets affected by changes in climate. So it's a big deal for what kinds of beer get produced and how they get produced, but also, the ultimate cost of producing beer. And you even see changes already happening where some places are starting to use cassava instead of barley or mixing it. I think even Guinness makes one like that in West Africa. So that's having an effect. Climate change is having an effect on beer and then the alcohol industry, but it's a huge problem for humanity as a whole. Then, the nuclear issue, which is most of what I talked about before, is becoming more and more alarming because some of the safeguards that have been in place for decades are being dismantled or ignored. And you see Russia and China and the United States now getting into kind of what appears to be a new arms race. So there's a lot of sort of scary stuff happening on that front. And then the third area that we cover with this disruptive technologies just kind of runs the gamut from genetic engineering and CRISPR, which, by the way, is being tested out on barley to make it more hearty. But then to artificial intelligence and the ways that might go out of control and, cause problems for society, and autonomous weapons like, drones and things like that we create thinking we're going to do something good with them. But, like nuclear weapons can have really negative consequences.
Well, once you drop that bomb, there's always a chance it might go off course, right? So that's too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Although I will say artificial intelligence has been used to make beer as well. I didn't put that in the piece, but there are a couple of breweries in Europe, at least, that I know of that have used AI to come up with new, like, optimized recipes through, these neural networks that pull in, 150,000 different recipes from all over the world and then kind of generate whatever they think matches the market interest. It's kind of nuts, but I haven't tasted them. And actually, I should say I haven't tasted any of the beers on my list because none of them were available in Chicago. But
well, that's the other thing. Would you actually want to drink any of those beers on the list? But who knows?
That is a good question.
Aaron, back to you, man. So Hacking Whiskey, we never really got to do a show about it. Kind of lost touch in the pandemic. Just tell us a little bit about that book, because you did some cool stuff in that book. Smoking, blending, fat washing, other whiskey experiments.
Yeah, Hacking Whiskey kind of stemmed from quite a few articles I was writing in, 2017, 2018, kind of looking at people in the underground whiskey community and what they were doing with whiskey opposed to, just simply drinking it. I guess at a certain point, if you're a whiskey collector and you have too many bottles, it gets boring just to open them and drink them. So you have to start playing around with them. So there's simple things from people making their own home blends that's taking several commercial whiskeys and blending them together. And some of those whiskeys have even gotten famous. There's this guy in California who makes his own blend called California Gold, and it kind of trades online, in private Facebook groups for a lot more money than you'd think for a insurance salesman in California who makes a whiskey. But then there's more complex stuff that brings you into the bar world, where you have real avant-garde bartenders doing things like fat washing whiskey. That's when you infuse a spirit with a literal fat, whether rendered bacon or butter or whatnot. Smoking whiskey, as you said, I'm sure everyone's had a smoked old fashioned before at a bar, which kind of dazzles. But yeah, just interesting stuff like that, culinary stuff, stupid stuff sometimes, quite frankly, but it's all fun and not taking your whiskey too seriously.
Yeah, but you as a writer, you're kind of always on your latest project, aren't you?
Yeah. You mean in terms of articles? Yeah.
Well, yeah, 2 or 3 years ago is almost ancient history to you, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Jimmy. Yeah, every day the new articles go out and new ones get started, of course.
Yeah. And where are you drinking lately?
What am I drinking lately?
What are you drinking and where are you drinking? Those two things.
I like most people, I spent 18 straight months drinking at home while my kids yelled at me. And, I didn't get to Chris's bar as much as I used to in the before times. But I've gone through all sorts of phases during the pandemic. The big cocktail making phase where you're making cocktails every single night. Lately I've just been drinking a lot of classic European beers, the old classics that kind of fell out of regard in America, but are still flawlessly made and kind of standard bears for style.
What are, name one or two?
Stuff like Weihenstephaner, which I believe is the oldest brewery in America. Not particularly cool in America, but easy to get. You can get it in most supermarkets, and all their German style beers, whether Hefeweizens or Eisenbachs are spot on and delicious every time. So stuff like that. I drink a lot of Czech beer and a lot of Czech inspired American beer, which has become somewhat hot in America. You're seeing lots of lots of American breweries, with beers that have, those weird Czech, symbols and whatnot over the letters that no one knows how to pronounce. But, they're making their 10-degree Plato Pilsners and whatnot. And quite frankly, doing a great job of it. Breweries like Threes here in Brooklyn and Schilling up in New Hampshire. So I've really been enjoying watching that trend occur.
That's great, man. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on. Chris, one more time, just Indiegogo for Beer Wax Queens. What is it?
It's you can just go right to our website. So Beerwax, BIERWAX Queens.com, or follow us on Instagram. That's Beerwax Queens.
Yeah, Beer Wax Queens, records and drinks, a place to wait out the doomsday clock. And then Thomas, thanks so much. This is really fun. Thanks for reaching out. Then again, when is the doomsday clock reset every year? Because I think there was urgency that I needed to talk to you sooner than later in case the doomsday clock changed.
Yeah, it's changed every year. It's generally set at the beginning of the year, late January. So we're anticipating that to be announced, whatever the time will be, at the end of January 27th, I think.
Yeah. And I will say one thing about the show and talking to you, it makes me realize that many of us drinkers and people in the food and drink industry, I feel like we don't really know a lot about science and data. And we just had a new New York Times science editor reach out about science and beer and agriculture. And I'm glad we got to talk to you, Thomas, because I think that we have a lot of myths in our lives, and we could all learn a little more about science. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
What's one gem of science that we should know? The average person doesn't know what that we could all learn about.
Oh man,
you told me about radiation. That actually we use it sometimes to purify things. And
wow. There's too many things in my head, but one thing that I would want people to know, I guess that, yeesh, you stumped me.
It might be okay to drink distillate from Chernobyl.
Right. That's true. Yeah, that there's change. Things can change, things can be bad, but then they can go back, which is part of the idea of the clock too. That it's not just ticking down to midnight, but you can move it backwards and things can get better.
Yeah.
So yeah,
well, it's the same thing. That you got that old river like the Hudson River, and it comes back to life, and people are fishing in it. So I guess the Earth can renew itself if we get out of the way. And you guys have been great, man. Aaron, sorry.
I will say,
go, Thomas.
I was just going to throw out the beer I'm drinking right now. So I was trying to find something, local, but I went with the Uni Brew. So they have La Fin du Monde, which is the end of the world in French. But they also have this Belgian-style IPA called Ce n'est pas le fin du monde, which is it's not the end of the world. So that kind of fits our theme, I guess, with going back and trying to make things better.
Oh, that's good, man. Yeah, I'm actually drinking something. I don't know how I got it. Night Shift Brewing, the 87 New England Double IPA. So very happy with that. It helps stimulate the conversation. Thank you, Night Shift. All right. So you guys have been great. Thomas, Aaron, and Chris, thanks for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network. Big shout out to our engineer, Armin Spengen. And I'm Jimmy Carboni. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thank you, guys.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like. Tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.